Welcome to the Inside Scoop, your one-stop shop for cracking the leadership code. Have you ever wondered what those conversations are like in the boardroom? Curious about the secret sauce successful executives possess? On the Inside Scoop podcast, we sit down with successful executives, getting their unique perspective on what it takes to be a good leader. They'll share their hard-won wisdom, the crucial competencies needed to thrive as a leader, and the unexpected lessons learned along the way. Here, we unlock the secrets of the executive suite. We get the inside track directly from the leaders themselves. In each episode, we'll dissect the essential skills needed to go from manager to leader, offering a leader's perspective on the challenges, triumphs, and unexpected wisdom they've acquired. The Inside Scoop, leadership lessons, served fresh.
By once again for this episode of the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Eduardo Bryant. Well, we've got a good show planned for you today because we're going to be talking about situational leadership with the guy who plays in this space, the data center infrastructure, and he knows a lot about it. This podcast is available anywhere where you get your podcast. And if you hear something that resonates with you, we invite you to subscribe and become part of our listening audience. This is an opportunity that we have, and it's not easy to get an ear with people who have the title of chief. This guy's chief operating, let me make sure I get this right. He is the chief revenue officer. There's a lot of people that play in that C-suite, so I want to make sure I get that right. And his name is Mark Glasgow. Let's welcome him in now. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alberto. Glad to be here.
You know what? It's a pleasure for us to have you. I mean, thank you for taking time out to just speak to the audience. As I mentioned in the opening, we're going to be talking about situational leadership. But before we get into all of that, and certainly we want to know your story, I always like to ask, what are you doing right now in terms of staying on top of your game and keeping everything sharp? In other words, what are you reading right now?
Well, that's a good question. I've got a stack of books that, and I'm one of these people that kind of will read 2 or 3 books at a time. So I just finished Outliers for the second time, which, by Malcolm Gladwell, one of my favorite books of all time. There's so much incredibly interesting information in that. But right now I'm reading a book called Play Bigger. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, it's how pirates, dreamers, and innovators create and dominate markets. It talks about category kings. And, an interesting example they give in the book is Cornell Glass, big in the insulation industry. They weave glass into to make your homes warmer and insulate homes. Well, they're also the provider of every iPhone screen that we have is from Corning Glass. And really interesting story how they literally dominate that market, that touch screen market. And it's very there's a lot that goes into that screen that most people don't realize. But they talk about how they have created categories and became category kings. Another example is AWS, how they became the category king for cloud in general, and have dominated that space and continue to do so to this day. So I'm really fascinated by that. And typically when I read, I don't read a lot of fiction. It's mostly business books. I feel like there's so much to learn and know. I actually get frustrated with fiction. I don't know why. I'd rather, maybe it's because I know there's so much knowledge in the business world that I don't know that I need to be reading. So I tend to stick to business books.
Nothing wrong with that. See, I always learn something. Every podcast I do, I myself am constantly learning. So I want to back you up for a second. You mentioned that the screen on our phones are made by this one company, the glass screen on here.
Yeah.
No, that's like world domination of screens, right? I mean, that's like a monopoly there.
Totally. Yeah. Steve Jobs, as the story goes, Steve Jobs went to, I believe they're in upstate New York. They're in New York somewhere, to visit with the folks at Corning and told them exactly what he needed. And they built a spec, and they're the ones with the IP and have provided this to Apple ever since. So a really interesting business story because they make insulation, like nothing related to do with computers at all. Yet here they are as the dominant player in that space. And again, that was largely as a result of Steve Jobs and his awareness of the business world and what he needed. So yeah, it's a really cool story.
Yeah, that is. I mean, what an excellent example of transferable skills. Here's a company that didn't do anything in that space, but they had the skills. And then that skill obviously became transferable because they were able to make a very niche product, which who would think of it, right?
Yeah.
The screen for your cell phone. Oh, that's pretty fascinating. You know, even in the business world, employees have transferable skills. And I'm sure we will get into some of that, where I think sometimes we think about employees and we say, okay, they are designated to do just this. But in actuality, they got skills clear across the board. Some people go from, you know, the basement to the boardroom, and they start out carrying a bag, and before you know it, they've got a title that's above most other people. So good skill.
Can I double click on that just because that's a really big pet peeve of mine. Nothing drives me nuttier because otherwise very, very smart people in very high positions, as I've gone through different job interviews, they look at your resume and they think, oh, you're just a hardware guy. You're not a software guy. And you know, the fact of the matter is the hardware doesn't do anything unless the software, the solution, the full solution, which involves both hardware and software. So whenever that comes up, and it literally comes up, I would say 80% of the time, which tells me that really a lot of people let their brains be pigeonholed into one thing or another. And I very gently try to change the conversation to, well, yes, I have sold hardware in the past because the software doesn't work without hardware. And by the way, the hardware doesn't work without the software. So I've never sold one without the other. So I'm as much of a software guy as I am a hardware guy. That it just blows me away that pigeonhole concept is prevalent as big as it is. But I think people should be careful with that because many of the greatest solution sales experts that I've ever had the honor of working with, they don't even focus on the speeds and feeds of their solution, whether it be from the hardware or the software. Mm-hmm. They focus on the business problems that they're trying to solve, and then back their way into, well, I happen to have this widget that solves that business problem. They focus on the business problem. At the end of the day, earnings per share runs this world, whether you like it or not. It does when you're talking about for-profit organizations. And so that's just something that I think is very important. So
it is a great point, Mark, because we talk about transferable skills, and we have to really understand what that means. We talk about it in terms of, well, if you were in this industry, say banking, and now you're going to come over and you're going to be doing something that is in a totally different industry. Do you have the skills that you learned in banking to now come over and do something here? And I think a lot of times, and that's a whole interviewing thing. I mean, we could spend hours on talking about how to interview and how to hire people and what to look for and how to be able to notice if a person has the skills for not only the job that's open, but the next job or even the job beyond that.
Sure.
Those skills are there. So to your point, hardware, software, yeah. I mean, you can't have one without the other. I even dove that into training. We do leadership training, we do sales training. You really can't have one without the other. If you just train the sales force, but you don't change the behavior of the leaders, then the sales force is going to not perform as well as it can. If you only train the leaders, then the salespeople don't get what they need. So it's almost like a hand in glove. They really need both of those things because it starts at the top. So much to your point, I think you're right. Transferable skills is something that we should be looking at, and it is a missed opportunity, I think, in a lot of cases. And I truly believe it starts with the interviewing process. Who do you have on the bench waiting for the next opportunity?
Yeah.
Another area that we can certainly go into. So you're welcome to piggyback off on that. So thank you for that.
You bet.
So now let's talk about you. Situational leadership is an area that is written in books. We've got it. It's on my bookshelf. It's probably on your bookshelf. I've been through the program along with many others, I'm sure, as you have. But let's talk about you, how you got where you are. How did you get to your position? What was the journey like? How do you get to become a chief revenue officer? Talk to us a little bit about that. How did you get where you are?
Well, that's a reflective question. So I don't know how far back you want to go. I was always a good student in school. Had 3.98 GPA in high school and played varsity football, basketball, baseball, was an Eagle Scout, and I really wanted to go to the Air Force Academy and fly jets. I applied, Didn't make it. I was told that my SAT scores were too low. I had a 1200. I thought that was a pretty decent score, and they said I would be uncompetitive. And I being as respectful as I could be at the age of 18, when my liaison officer told me, well, we just don't think you're going to be competitive. I'm like, wait, what did you just say? Like, anyone who knows me knows that I'm competitive to a fault, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But yeah, hyper competitive, don't like to lose, love to win. And I had some big failures in my life. And one of them was, getting over the fact that my whole entire life up to being told I was not going to be competitive at the Air Force Academy was all about going to fly jets. That's what I wanted to do. So I didn't take that path. I ended up going, my backup plan was Brigham Young University, and that ended up being a great experience. I actually served a mission in Bogota, Colombia at the height of the cocaine wars during Pablo Escobar's reign of terror. So that was an interesting experience. I didn't learn a lot of book smarts down there, but I learned how to be very street smart and not get dead being a, quote unquote gringo in a pretty tumultuous, country in South America at the time. And if you've seen the movie Narcos, a lot of times Hollywood will embellish stories to make them more interesting. I've watched Narcos twice, and it's there's no embellishment. That's how it was. It was the wild, wild west. So I learned a lot there and made a lot of unbelievably awesome friends, learned how to speak Spanish fluently. And it was just an amazing time from age 19 to 21 to do nothing for yourself and serve others for 2 years straight was pretty awesome. So that had a big impact on my career. And then I graduated with a finance degree and didn't really have a clue where I was. I was thinking Wall Street, but I didn't have the money to get a much needed MBA in order to be competitive on Wall Street. And I knew that. So I went to work for Shell Oil because it was a big logo, and I wanted to work for a big company to get the experience. And they also would pay for an MBA at any school that I got into. Actually got accepted to Wharton, but didn't go. That's a whole other story. My wife and I were married. We had our first child on the way, and I wasn't making very much money at Shell, but getting great experience. And I while I was there, I met a data storage company called Pinnacle Micro, based out of Irvine, California. And they needed a regional sales manager. And the first thing I asked is, how much do you guys pay? Because I was not making I think I was making $28,000 a year. So barely able to put a roof over my head. And they're like, yeah, if you don't make six figures in your first year, then something's wrong. So I knew I'd be competitive. I didn't know anything about data storage or data center infrastructure, but away I went. So that was 92. And I've been in the data center infrastructure / data storage arena ever since. It's been a great career. I won't go through every job experience I had, but needless to say, I started out as an individual contributor, carrying a bag, learning how to sell this digital storage, and also was learning how to call into the C-suite. That was a big move. I made the move from Pinnacle. We took that. It was a pre-IPO company, took it all the way through to an IPO. And then I moved on and jumped on with a company called Sequent, which made the cheapest item on their price sheet was they sold database servers, and the cheapest server we had was started at $1 million. So these were big ticket purchases. And Casey Powell, the CEO and founder of Sequent, was famously known for paying his top guys 7-figure W-2s. And I'm thinking, well, there's no way I'm not going to be one of the top guys, and that means I'm making $1 million a year. Where do I sign up? I went and interviewed with them. I actually met Casey Powell through a friend. And so I actually was able to drop the CEO and founder's name, and I didn't get the job. I was like, what? I know the CEO. And but that turned out to be a test to see how bad I wanted it. And so I stayed after him. They finally said, okay, kid, you have no experience. I mean, I was going in there with folks that had 20, 30 years of selling mainframe gear for Amdahl and IBM, and I knew nothing. I've been selling PC level data storage at Pinnacle Micro, but what I lacked in knowledge, I made up for in enthusiasm and in my homework. I was very, very prepared for every interaction I had with them. And they said, okay, we're going to give you a shot. And they gave me the one account in the Pacific Northwest. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. They gave me the one account that nobody wanted because it was a huge, everyone in the world knew this was a marquee account for Hewlett Packard. And so I got the toughest assignment to go, and the company was Weyerhaeuser, $15 billion pulp and paper products company. And they said, go in and learn. We're going to give you 12 months to figure out a way to get to the CIO. Guy's name was Cliff Hall. I knew everything there was to know about Cliff. I knew I knew what fraternity he rushed. I knew his favorite drink. I knew where he met his wife. I knew how many kids he had. I knew what he majored in. I knew everything about this guy. And long story short, I ended up getting Cliff and his entire 11 of his lieutenants on Casey Powell's Gulfstream, and we flew them into Portland for an executive briefing, and we ended up doing a $6 million deal in the 12th month that I was there. So by the skin of my teeth, I made it. And then I was off to the races. Once I had that account, I went and nailed a couple of other big accounts, and ended up being the top salesman worldwide in 1999. And that put me on the radar of the CEO and founder, Casey Powell, who then sold his company after running it for 18 years. He sold it to IBM for right around $1 billion. And we just stayed in touch. And he ends up becoming the CEO of a struggling data storage company out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota by the name of Xiotech. And I was his first phone call. He's like, hey, I've got a real VP of sales job for you here. This is a $100 million company. You'll have 30 sales teams you got to manage. And he knew darn well this was a major career bump for me. Like I was going to be swimming, barely keeping up. But he knew the grit and the tenacity that I had exhibited under his command at Sequent. And that was enough for him to know. And he's incidentally the guy that trained me up on situational leadership, and he introduced me to the concept of this framework that ended up becoming a shorthand for all the executives at Xiotech. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But that's kind of how I got into the VP of sales role. And then I did that a couple more times at a few other companies. Did a startup called Solid Fire that was funded by NEA, one of the hottest VCs in Silicon Valley. And then they ended up getting bought by NetApp for just shy of $1 billion. So that was a nice ride. I ran the advanced systems group for Michael Dell North America, a little over $1 billion P&L. That was a good ride. And then not long after that, a big executive recruiting firm by the name of Korn Ferry called me up and said, hey, we like your resume. And they pointed out something that I had never really considered. They said, we like your resume for this role at Micron Semiconductor, which is a 35-year-old semiconductor company that had only ever gone to market through OEMs. And they wanted to start a new sales force that was customer facing, not using the OEMs, but going right to the big hyperscalers like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, and the Chinese hyperscalers, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. Those 8 companies were buying as much as the big OEMs, HP, IBM, Hewlett Packard, Dell. So I took that job. So I was only at Dell for about 15 months, but this VP Worldwide Enterprise Sales role came up at Micron, and got a chance to meet the CEO of Micron, Mark Durkin. Really, really liked his leadership style. No nonsense guy. Had great support, and away we went. And we grew what was about $100 million a year business to several billion in revenues in 3.5 years. Hired 75 people in a very short period of time, and we took Micron from being dead last in the NAND flash storage arena in terms of market share to #1. And about once we had the product, the enterprise class product to sell, in about 18 months, we went from worst to first in a short period of time. So I'm really proud of that experience. Then Mark Durkin surprised everybody with an early retirement, and I was already talking to a guy by the name of David Flynn, who was the original CEO and founder of a really successful company in Salt Lake City by the name of Fusion.io. David sold that company to SanDisk, made a couple $100 million for himself, and started another company called Hammerspace. Started one before that called Primary Data, and that morphed into Hammerspace. So when Mark Durkin resigned, I had, like I said, been having conversations with David and took a role at a gritty startup called Hammerspace, which is now doing incredibly well. In fact, just yesterday, Facebook blogged about how they selected Hammerspace to be their data orchestration layer for all of their production AI data centers. So all the time I spent at Hammerspace, about 3 years, and the stock options that I bought are now looking quite interesting because of some of the incredible strides and progress that they've made. So that's kind of the quick version of my background. And yeah, it's been a good ride, but no doubt, getting into that VP level role, that's because of the mentorship by some really smart executives that I knew enough to network my way into their kind of get on their radar screen and see if they couldn't help me along. And sure enough, Casey was that guy and really helped pull me along.
What an impressive list of accomplishments. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I mean, and again, I'm so gratified to have a person like you on the podcast because we don't get an audience with you often. You're one of those C-suite people that we only see walk out on the big stage at a big national meeting, and you come out and you give your spiel, and everybody claps for you, and we may or may not see you, at the awards banquet. Perhaps, you might be milling around when they call it cocktail hour, and maybe you're there and few people that get a chance to tell you something about themselves. But otherwise, we don't get an audience with you guys, which is so exciting. But I do want to take you back to something because as I was listening to your story, again, very impressive, your accomplishments, those things that you have done. But I would say from listening to you, it sounds like somewhere you got a kickstart when you did not get into the Air Force to be able to fly fighter jets. Tell me, was that a pivotal point that was a dejection that made you say, wait a minute, I got a 1200 and you're telling me you don't think I'll be competitive? And even throughout my younger years, high school, maybe even middle school, you had done all these things, been in sports and everything. Then all of a sudden, you got a goal that you want to go into the Air Force. It's wonderful that you did a mission. I think that is admirable and honorable and a great thing. And then you obviously went to college and got a degree and then so forth. But that point stuck with me and it said, did it do something for you there, not getting in? Was that
Yeah, no doubt about it. Can't you see this huge chip on my shoulder? And I still have it today. No, it absolutely, the little did I know that kind of failure, and it was failure. I mean, my goal was to do that, to go fly F-16s, and didn't happen. And, there were other routes I could have taken. They were trying to sell me on, join the ROTC at BYU, which, by the way, I did for a semester, marching at 6 a.m. in the snow with the snow blowing sideways. That was one semester enough, and that's when I decided to go to South America and do something completely different. It definitely fueled me, and I realized, I wouldn't say everything had come easy for me up until then, but I was always a hard worker, and I was very, very focused and pretty studious, to make sure I got good grades because I wanted to have those options. And when that option was taken away, I was bitter. I was really bitter, and they told me like there was a kind of like a fifth year of high school at an academy in Colorado Springs, right next to the Air Force Academy. That they were like, you could go do this. The tuition was steep and prove yourself, and you'll probably get in, but there was no guarantee. And I'm like, you know what? If you don't want me now, you can't have me. And I wish I would have maybe taken a closer look at that. It is what it is, and no regrets, by the way. I'm glad the way my life turned out. I went to BYU, found my wife there. We got married. We were married today now, 34 years later, with 4 kids and 2 grandkids. So it turned out fantastic. Yeah, but it did. I'm not gonna lie. It was a huge kick in the gut, and it gave me a little bit of a chip. Like I had something to prove. Now I will tell you, I've had 3 different folks work for me that flew jets for the Air Force. So that's and they're always my favorite because I told them, look, I didn't get in, so that's why I'm hiring you, because you did, and I know how special you got to be to sit in those cockpits. You've got to be the cream of the crop, best. Back then your eye vision mattered, 20/20 only. You're a physical specimen. You're an intellectual specimen. You are the best of the best. So when I see those guys fly over on 4th of July and they do their low-level flybys, I live in Utah near Hill Air Force Base, which has the largest fleet of F-35s in the world, 5th-generation fighters. So I see them flying around, and I look at that guy in the cockpit, and I'm like, that's the real deal right there. You don't get to fly a $50 million jet and be, 2nd or 3rd class. You're the number 1 guy. So, or gal. There's lots of ladies that are doing that now, which I think is awesome. So yeah, it definitely gave me some fuel.
You know what? Let me tell you, failure is the catapult to success. And those like yourself who have had something happen that you wanted to do, and oftentimes, Mark, we think about other people having control over our future, but that's only if we let them have that control. It's only if we release it to them. You may have wanted to do something that somebody blocked. I mean, I don't know who this person was that said a 1200 score is not enough and that you would not be competitive. At least they didn't think you would be. And I mean, we all have had it. I mean, just listening to your story, and I think about how many times someone said no to me.
Mhm.
How many times did someone not promote me to a position and they promoted someone else? And one of the worst things is when someone gets promoted who clearly is not more qualified than you. In fact, they may be junior to you. I'll even take it a step further. Maybe you trained them.
Yeah.
Now you start to think, why would I give the power to someone else to be in charge of my success? I'll take my success and I'll go a different route and I'll make a name for myself. And I think you did just that with all that you've done.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
talk a little. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just a quick comment. The old sort of trite saying that's out there is, the people that have this tremendous success, the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks,
Mhm.
they failed one more time than the rest of us. They have their failures. It was not always easy flowing for them. These are extraordinary people that do not let failure. I'm talking about getting kicked off the horse and trampled. They get back up, dust themselves off, and get right back on the same damn horse that kicked them off. And that's something I didn't do. I could have taken a couple of different avenues. I did join the ROTC and tried that for a bit, and then I was young and bitter, and I just went a totally different direction. But it didn't slow me down. I took the same enthusiasm that I would have taken into flying jets and put it into selling data center storage.
No, I love that. I mean, revenge, the greatest form of revenge is success.
Success. That's it.
You go and be successful. I mean, and look at the hats you've been able to wear. And I think for everybody that has had any level of failure, success is your greatest form of revenge. Whoever said, no, you're not qualified, no, you can't do it, we don't think you should be there, don't give people that opportunity. You take another path and you go and you succeed. That mentality is born out and it becomes part of the whole leadership space. To
Yeah.
be a leader, you've got to have that. You've got to be able to do that. I mean, this is probably what made you such a great leader when you talk about the whole situational leadership and the space you're in and having climbed up the ladder. Did I hear you say you carried the bag and now you reached a chief suite level?
Yeah, I was an individual contributor and had to learn the craft and then become the best at it. And in a couple of companies, I was the number one salesperson, but I let my superiors know, hey, I'm interested in a career path through management. And I know a lot of people that were as successful as I was as a individual contributor, but they chose to not go into management. They wanted to stay just carrying a bag, making a bunch of money. Good for them. That's great. At least they're true to themselves. But for whatever reason, I wanted to go on that career path, climb that ladder. And the opportunities came. I just knew that I had to be, all in and do my very level best to always be the top or one of the top salespeople.
I think that's important. It's a great point that you're making there because when people decide that they don't want to go into management and they want to stay where they are, I think that's good. Sometimes managers try to push them into it because of their tenure with the company. But if you know where your skill set is and your level of comfort, I think you should stay there because you shouldn't chase certain things like money because you ultimately won't be happy from that. It's about doing what you want to do, making
Yeah.
sure that you're happy at that. There's some skills. There are different traits that are needed in order to be in management and to be successful. Every time I tell people about what I do, every time I talk about leadership, I always get, oh, we need it. Come to our company. Our company doesn't have this. There's so many areas of leadership just to be good. Having the title is one thing, but being proficient at it is totally different. And a lot of people think they're proficient when they really are not. Over your career, surely you have seen areas where managers need to step it up.
Yeah, well, boy, that's a really big touch point with me. I remember as an individual contributor having a variety of bosses, thinking to myself, man, if I ever get into management, I know I will never do that. So I knew what I didn't like, And then this concept came along not too long ago that I have always subscribed to, but someone put a name on it. Now there's colleges that are teaching it, called servant leadership. And so you mentioned a minute ago about, the C-suite guys, tough to get to. You might only see them at a sales awards meeting, and even then it's tough to get their time and attention. I surely hope I've never been that person. As a head of sales, and my wife will tell you, I think I travel more than most humans. There's one or two folks that I think travel more than I do, but I always stayed out in the field working with my teams. And the funnest part of being a sales manager is being in front of the customer. So the couple of things that go with that, not only do you get to see how your teams interact directly with the customer, which is where the rubber meets the road as a sales leader, you also, if you're not in front of the customers, hearing with your own ears what they're saying, too much gets lost in translation, and it gets very difficult, in my opinion, to do your job as a sales leader unless you know exactly what a nice statistical sample set of the customers are saying about your solutions. Mm-hmm. So that was really another big driver for me to stay in the field and in front of my teams and in front of customers as often as the business would allow. Yeah, I do the requisite amount of spreadsheets and pivot tables and all that kind of stuff for the analytics, and I do try to hire very good sales ops people. Had one guy that worked with me at 3 different companies, greatest sales op guy I ever knew, and he was my co-pilot. He knew that I could do the numbers. I have a finance degree. I can get into the analytics. I don't really like it that much. And that's honestly, that's one of the reasons why I chose that degree with an emphasis in finance, was because I knew I wasn't analytically the strongest, and I thought, man, maybe if I get a degree in it, I'll learn to like it. Yeah, still don't love it. Other folks are brilliant at it, and as a leader, as they say, that the strongest leaders hire people smarter than them, and I try to do that. I'm not afraid of hiring people that are experts at those things. And then we work, and then it's about building the team and making sure everybody knows I am not going to sit behind a desk and bark out commands. I will get in the field and lead from the front and be there. I won't ask anyone to do something I haven't already done myself. And that's served me well. But the servant leadership thing is a big deal, I believe.
As a servant, learning all about servant leadership, as a person at your level, you're out in the field, it sounds like, as much as maybe a regional or a district manager, first line management, who's working directly with the team. Sounds like you're out there just about as much as they are.
I'd like to think that I am. And there's been at least one job that I can remember at a Fortune 50 company that they said I was spending too much time in the field. How about that? That's something you don't hear very often. They wanted me to spend more time politicking in headquarters. And I just thought, man, if that's what's required here, I just philosophically have an issue with that. And not to say that I didn't like my executive counterparts. I really don't care all that much for politicking. I think, let me tell you a quick story. So in high school, I played football. I'm not very big. I'm only 5'10", but I loved the game of football, played it my whole life, up to high school. Never made it to the D1 category, but my high school football coach, Boyd Crawford, we had a pretty good team. And the other teams would talk a lot of trash. I mean, they would say all manner of disgusting things about your mom and your sister, and just to get inside your head and try to get you off your game. And my coach was adamant: if I ever hear any of you talking trash of any kind to the other team, you will be immediately kicked out of the game and sit on my bench. And if it happens twice, you're off the team. So guess what? We didn't talk trash. He said, there is one thing I will let you do. If the other guy's saying bad things about your mother, you just point to the scoreboard. And you better hope you're ahead. So how does that translate to sales? Well, I didn't like to go around doing a lot of talking and politicking. If they wanted to know my value add, I just pointed to the scoreboard and said, well, look, this is the revenue the sales team brought in. This is the growth quarter on quarter, year over year. That's what I've done in terms of adding value. Now, I realize that sounds a little harsh, and yes, I'm not an idiot. I do the requisite amount of politicking, but it's not how I climb the ladder. I did it through performance. I either suck or I'm good, and I wanted it to be that way because I could lean on that track record for anything. So,
how do you teach that? Better question: is it possible to teach that, or is that just innate?
At this point in my career, as I look at other people that are very, very good politicians, I would be lying if I didn't say I'm a little bit jealous, because that's a skill I readily admit I don't have. I'm not a good politician. And so teaching people to care less about politics and to focus more on performance. There's a number of ways. I mean, you assign quotas, but I think the best way for me was, hey, I've given you this, I've saddled you with this big quota this year. Now let's get out and work together, and let me get my fingerprints on the weapon, as they say. That, make me part of the sales process. So if it doesn't come in, there's no one else to blame but me. Like, I'm not going to point the finger at you because I was involved. I had my fingerprints on this deal, and it didn't come in. And so it's a way of building a really tight-knit team. And I absolutely believe this is a team sport that we play in enterprise sales. And you've got to understand that concept about bringing other team members along, making sure you don't have blind spots about the other team members. It's easy to get into this myopic, it's all about me kind of a deal. And there are salespeople like that. And privately, I'll coach them up saying, hey, let's bring the team along. You're doing some wonderful things over here. There's 50 other people that would love to learn from you. And so you kind of build them up, and then you kind of start to see who are the leaders and who want to, who might you have as your second in command. And so I think, to answer your question about how do you teach that, for me, it was just get in the field, get in front of customers, and show them by example.
So let's put some teeth around that and talk about some tangible things, because when a person is in management and they're out, working with their people, their reps, their employees, there's going to be a fear factor. I mean, let's just call it what it is. There's a certain level of intimidation on the employee's part to have someone from what we call the ivory suites to actually come and spend a day out in the field with them, spend time working with them. There's going to be that nervousness thing. We used to say, uh-oh, the big boss is coming. You better get your car washed. You better vacuum it out on the inside, get rid of any trash that's on the floorboard. There's going to be that. But now when that person comes out, i.e. you, Mark, you come out and there you are, what are some tangible, some actual things you as a, chief revenue officer spending time out in the field, or even as a vice president spending time out in the field with someone, what are some things you're doing? What are you saying? What are you bringing to the table? How are you managing that somewhat stressful situation? Not for you, but for the poor guy that you're working with.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, the time that we spend in the car together, and by the way, I totally, like, I'm the guy that would wash my car and vacuum it out. It was spotless. But, the ones that they got 3 baby seats in the back and there's graham crackers on the floor. Like, I love that because it just shows like this is a family person. They got a lot on their plate. They didn't have time to clean the car. No demerit whatsoever. If anything, it endears me to them because they're juggling. Like, I've been there. I had that. I had at least 2 kids in diapers for quite a while. And so I thought that was great, but I would typically let them direct the conversation in between sales calls. Now, what we chose to talk about, I was always very careful to kind of play the beta dog on that, let them guide the conversation. That told me where their head was and what they were thinking about. So that was always it wasn't a test, but it was something that I keyed off of just to see where, how engaged is this person? And then the ones that I love, the thing that I love most when I would show up to work with some of my members of my team, were the ones that had a full profile prepared for, and they usually send it to you the night before, and you read it on the airplane in that morning, and it's got, it shows me how well they know their customer, and it shows me, do they care if I look like an idiot in front of them or not? Now, if they didn't send that, I would do my own homework, obviously. Usually just go read their financials and kind of see what recent press releases are said, and maybe even read a bit of their annual report, the letter from the CEO, just to see where the company mindset is. But I love the salespeople that would take the time to put that little book together of, here's who we're seeing today. This is, and here's another really smart thing that all the top level players would do. They would say, Mark, here are the things that you're allowed to say, and these are the 4 topics you cannot bring up. So it's as important to say what you want to talk about as what you should avoid. That told me their level of understanding and their level of engagement at that customer was exactly what mine would be if I was the individual contributor on that account. So stuff like that is really good.
Smart. I mean, that level of preparation obviously can engender you to more success. And certainly that kind of makes the the conversation go a little bit smoother, and then the whole day that you spend is going to be great with them. So
Yeah.
in leadership, as you are right now, do you see some differential between the way you would manage as a C-suite person versus someone that's more in mid-management?
Well, the scope or the span of control, as they call it, will kind of, at least for me, it would guide kind of where I would spend my time and burn my calories. And so mid-management, they've got a little more narrower focus and scope. And as you start moving up that ladder, you got to look at more of the strategic macro things and less about the tactical side. So as I would have conversations with my mid-level managers, I would, ask them about it was more about the tactical things that I needed to know that they knew was going on. But then, the one thing I would love was when they would turn the conversation to me about, well, talk to me about the strategy, the go-to-market, what about the competition and some of the things they're saying about us and all that kind of stuff. And I had to be on my game and make sure I was well read up on those things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If you look back over all your career and you were saying to yourself, what could I have done different? What could I have done better? How could I have changed a few things? I wish I would have. What would follow the I wish I would have?
I really don't have regrets, but I know I've made a ton of mistakes, and it's something I have not really thought about. Let me give it a second here. There's some people that stay with one company for 25 years. And I have tremendous respect for that. That was not that guy. When I saw an opportunity to move up in the world, I took it. My wife and I both agreed when we first got married that we would move with the career. We would let the job dictate where we lived. So we lived in some interesting places, lived in Houston and Dallas and in Orange County and Portland, Seattle. And then we finally settled down in Salt Lake, where she's from. We've been here now for 25 years. But, I would say I might have stayed a little longer at some of these really fantastic, somewhat high profile jobs, like running the advanced systems group for Dell. I was only there 15, 16 months, but that's because a really fantastic job opportunity came up at Micron, which is, a Fortune 50 semiconductor company that is about as hot as they get right now, right along with NVIDIA. And so I don't know that I would have voted with my feet as I did. I might have stayed a little longer at some of those jobs, just because the learning and the networking and the Rolodex building that you get at those bigger jobs is invaluable. It's hard to articulate just how valuable that is. And I moved around quite a bit.
And we see a lot of that. We see people who don't stay with jobs anymore for the 35, 40 years,
Right.
retire, get a gold watch, they throw them a party, and then they ride off in the sunset. I think anymore, a career path is just like yours. When an opportunity comes up, either you hop or someone steals you. So
Right.
they'll come looking for you because your reputation precedes you. And once they know that you're good at it, then of course they want you to come and help them.
Right.
And they make the offer so attractive that it becomes very difficult to say no.
Right. Yeah, no doubt about it.
Excellent. What an awesome opportunity to get a chance to talk to you, Mark, and just to hear your stories and your path and how you've done some of those things. I'm going to give you a moment here in case there are some things that you might have wanted to say, some things that you would like to fill in, or maybe even any last parting remarks to our audience. I'm going to give you a chance now that you can certainly say anything you want that could be encouraging to other people
Okay.
out there who are climbing the ladder, trying to make a foothold, trying to make a name for themselves and doing those things. So the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Alberto. This has been a treat for me. So thank you. It's great to get to know you. You're clearly asking smart questions. I think the one thing that we didn't cover that I should at least give a mention to is, you're not born with management skills. That's not an innate thing. That's a learned skill. And so, again, I mentioned Casey Powell, this mentor that I had that, again, he was CEO and founder of Sequent. And he's the one who introduced me to the concept of situational leadership. And the cool thing about situational leadership is that framework works both at work and at home in managing my family. And so, when I think of situational leadership, there's a 4-box quadrant that on the X and Y axis, you've got willingness and capability. So you want the person that's both willing and very capable. That's your all-star. But then there's invariably, especially when you get into some of the larger organizations, there are people that are both unwilling and incapable. And so with those folks, you need to get very prescriptive with them to, okay, when you come into work, get your cup of coffee, sit down, then I need you to call these 75 people and literally prescribe, and if they're not willing to do that, then they self-select and they wash out, which, you hate to see, but I like to think that I've gone way out of my way to help people. If they're struggling, to help them, be very prescriptive with them, saying, look, man, if I had your role, these are the things I would be doing every day. If you want, I'll spell it out for you every minute of the day. And if you'll do these things, I know it's very little chance you won't succeed. And some people do, and they snap a firm salute and away they go. And others just like, life happens to people. They have, heavy stuff going on at home and whatnot, and they're just not able to follow the prescription that I gave them. And that happens. But I think that's the one thing that has made a huge difference in my ability to be an effective leader, was to understand people. And I hate to put people in categories, because I do believe people grow and they change and they evolve. And so I mentioned the situational leadership framework with that one caveat, which is it's a nice framework as a foundation upon which to build your management career, but also know that, what one person is today may be unwilling and incapable. That can change, and you've got to see those doors of opportunity for them to go through to develop as a person in that company and on that team. And the other thing is just teamwork in general. I think if you haven't played team sports, it's not a showstopper, but it sure does help, because this is a team sport. Selling into the enterprise, it is not one person. It is an entire team of people, and the ones that know how to build that cohesive team always do better. So I think those are the two things. But yeah, it's been a wonderful career. I love it. I'm having the time of my life right now. Couldn't be happier, and thankful that I could share this with you, and hopefully it helps someone else.
Well, not only with me, but the audience at large. I believe you have a graph.
Yeah, I can
I'd
show
like to show that. Talk to it for the people that are just listening.
All right, can you see that now?
I can see it.
Okay, yeah. So this is the X and Y axis, the capability and the willingness factor. So what happens with a management team that has been trained up on this, you get basically what Casey used to call high bandwidth communications between the executive members. And so they can say, hey, Mark, how's Bob Jones? Like, well, I had to go S1 with him the other day. And, oh, really, what's up? So when I said S1, that carried a whole volume of meaning for them. And I didn't have to go into and explain it. It just means, okay, this person needs to be very prescriptive. Or I need to be take a prescriptive management style. And so, or you know what, this person's an S4, and they automatically know, okay, this person's willing, capable, fill them full of full tank of gas, and then get out of their way, clear the path before them. And that's kind of how I operated as an individual contributor. And I used to tease my bosses, like, look, I just clear the path before me. No, I'm not going to ask you to do my expense reports for me. I will do those on Sundays. But everything else, you just get the political BS from corporate headquarters out of my way and clear the path. And that's what all the great managers that I had did for me. And let me just focus on doing the impossible task they were asking me to do at Sequent, which was to go close the almighty warehouser. So this framework is something that I've been able to use both in my personal life and at work. And I just recommend it to anyone. There's a movie, 1950s movie starring Gregory Peck called 12 O'Clock High. That actually is unbelievable about how closely it follows this situational leadership framework. And you can see it in action. And Gregory Peck comes into a squadron in World War II that was having far too many planes being shot down. And as he got in there, they were, the leader of that squadron was pretty loosey-goosey. And Gregory Peck was kind of the big scary general that came in and tightened the ship up, and the other word. And guess what? Their airplanes stopped getting shot down. So it's an interesting movie. It's very entertaining. I've watched, gosh, at least a dozen times. And it takes you through this, not necessarily using S1, S2, S3, S4, but you'll see how it follows this framework. And yeah, it's just been a great thing. Like I said, people are not born with this knowledge. I had to be trained up on it, and it made an enormous difference in my career as a manager.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
You bet.
That's really good. That's good stuff there. So you want to be in management, this is what it takes. It takes that.
Yeah. And there's other leadership programs out there, but this is my favorite. And you know what?
Good one.
I may just go as I move into my retirement years. I've often thought about creating a consulting agency around this, because there's a lot of companies that, they're flying forward through time, and their hair's on fire, and they've got so many, they don't take the time to do this. But if you can convince them to slow down for a half a day offsite, you can go through this, and it changes companies.
I love it. You know what, Mark? This has been awesome. Great stuff. Good stuff. I hope our audience enjoyed it. I hope they got some great takeaways from it. I certainly did. So hopefully they did as well. I want to thank everybody out there who tuned in for this episode of the Inside Scoop. Once again, if something kind of resonated with you, we do invite you to subscribe and become part of our viewership. We'd like to thank our guest, Mark Glasgow, for imparting and sharing his knowledge and his vast wisdom that he has. And it was a great benefit to all of us. So once again, Mark, we thank you for that.
Thank you, Alberto. It's my pleasure.
All right. So we're going to sign off now for this episode. We look forward to seeing you again. Everyone have a great day. And until we meet again, bye for now.
For more exclusive leadership insights, be sure to subscribe to the Inside Scoop on YouTube and Spotify. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that share button and spread the word. See you next time on the Inside Scoop.